Serious Redditors who were once homeless. What was the scariest, creepiest part about being out in the streets? Story 1. The thought that someone would find your camp and ruin yours was a real concern. Also just finding some here to sleep that is secure. One morning, early, I was sleeping in an abandoned warehouse up a set of stairs nearly in the rafters and was woken by 4 raccoons like 4 feet from me eating my bag. Having to in the middle of the night is also awful. Being homeless is only scary for a couple of days. There's depression and boredom that are your real enemies. Your body and mind go into a sort of hyper-survival mode and there is no room for fear. Story 2. As a girl, the constant harassment and rape threats. I was always in the hood when I was homeless. Guys blocking your way to leave with their trucks to ask you to there for 15, and if you say no they drive in front of you even more if you try to leave. Just knock his side mirror off and run. Story 3. Bugs. I used to sleep behind dumpsters, and the fear of roaches crawling on me in my sleep was enough to make sure I only slept 2 to 3 hours. Made me try to find hospital bathrooms and just lock the door for 5 to 6 hours. Story 4. I hate the dark. It's stupid I know, but I always felt like something was coming for me. I always had to find a corner and hide from the other homeless. I don't know if I had to hide, but I was very young and am a girl and ID had my head filled with how every unsupervised girl got raped repeatedly. I thought I would literally be raped to death if anyone found me. On the upshot I rule at hide and seek, and I can almost sleep well outside of a corner. Story 5. I moved out at 15 and lived near Muskegon, Michigan, tried to avoid it, but that's where possible jobs and rides were, so I went there to better myself. Was homeless for about a year and just couch surfed, stayed with random people or just slept in abandoned buildings or parks. Scariest part was knowing that once the sun started going down, I had to lay low and find a place to crash for the night. Walking the streets of Muskegon after dark is awful, especially when you're young. People tried to rob me, take advantage of me, sell me drugs which I took then follow my whereabouts, chase me just for fun. It was awful. I wouldn't even have anything on me except my clothes and someone would come up with a gun or knife and tell me to give them everything I had. One time when I couldn't give a guy anything, he beat the out of me just for fun and cut my arm up bad. Worst time of my life. Story 6. I made a separate account because I don't want this associated with my regular one since I got my life back together. I used to sell services to random guys which helped me get out of being homeless after a few months. I'm not gay but I was desperate to get out of my predicament and did what I had to. I'm a pretty feminine looking man when I had long hair and that attracted a lot of old men, lonely men, just randoms. Never really had problems with other homeless people because I stayed in a local city shelter at night and had to leave during daytime. Hanging around convenience stores and parking lots where they have game rooms, slot machine rooms is where I got most of my clients. Most of them were chill, get what they want and leave. Some were crazy. One guy in particular wanted me to stay at his place overnight and spend the next day with him for $1,000. I decided cool and we went to his house. The guy had what I can describe as like a torture dungeon in his garage. He had some type of black filament with egg cartons all over the walls and BDSM type stuff laying around. I decided it wasn't a good idea and said I changed my mind, but he wouldn't let me leave. We were yelling back and forth and he punched me in the collarbone. It didn't hurt, probably because of adrenaline. I used to do Kyokushin karate as a kid teenager, so after he hit me, I kicked him as hard as I could in the and kneed him in the temple and ran out the house. I ran from block to block hiding because I was afraid he would try to kidnap me or call the cops. I never saw the guy again, even after going back to the spots I always hang out at. I eventually made enough money to get an apartment and eventually a logistics job for a supply chain. Story 7. How little you matter to anyone. There are 2 kinds of people I learned to avoid very quickly. Groups of young men, teenagers, and fellow homeless men. If someone's gonna with you, they'll fall in one of these groups, and people may watch disapprovingly, but they won't do anything to help you. It's less important to most people that you be somewhere safe or with a bit of shelter from the weather, than it is that you be where they don't have to see you. Most of your interactions with people such as the police, who in normal life you consider to be concerned primarily with your safety, when you're homeless are more about making you less inconvenient to others. Story 8. The hopelessness and pressure of knowing the longer you spend homeless, the harder it is to get out of it. At least that's what I got from the people I talked to. I was homeless for a summer, but really I was just a kid having an adventure and I didn't feel good at home. Talking to people whose parents were homeless and had no life skills, or those with addiction who had no support to help them kick it and get back on track, or people who no longer knew how to even begin to find a job scare the out of me, I realized that a couple years of that and you would have to work super hard to get out of it. I was never a super hard worker. Story 9. All the people who assume you'll have with them for money. I was a young man at the time and I would get propositioned daily, mostly by creepy old men. The scariest bit would probably have been knowing that someone could kill you and no one would really care. Story 10. A little while ago I was mentally ill and about of substance abuse and I ended up on the streets of Brooklyn. The scariest thing to me was how quickly I lost hope and how quickly I became invisible. Suddenly I could easily see how a perfectly normal person could make one wrong move in life and end up homeless for years if not decades. Luckily for me I caught a break, ended up in a psych ward after a short time homeless and had a few contacts to get me home to New England. Edit. I just remembered this episode and looking back it was kind of a poignant moment. Dead of night, maybe 2 a.m. on the A train where I shared a car with 6 homeless guys all passed out drunk or high. The smell of everything you could imagine that car to be like, and what dawned on me was one of the most glaringly obvious lessons life has ever presented me with, as I realized it wasn't 6 homeless guys and me. It was just 7 homeless guys. Story 11 spent 2007 to 2012 homeless. Most of that was my teenage years spent with my father also homeless. The scariest thing is spending the evening in some homeless shelters, or out of them in this case. I was in one in Portland, Maine. My dad was assigned a spot to sleep on the floor because they were overcrowded that day. They didn't have a spot for me, so I slept across the street in the garden of the local Catholic church since the priests don't kick people out. It was a popular place to sleep when the shelter was overbooked. I remember sleeping in the grass near a couple whom I overheard talking about robbing me for well over 20 minutes. I didn't let go of my knife all night. The most surreal moment was a short stint in 2010, when I walked into the 400-square-foot studio apartment my dad had finally been able to afford for a short while and asking him, "This is all ours. We lived like kings that few months." Story 12 My mom kicked me out in January 2016. In the midst of my first year of law school, I was forced to sleep in my car for 5 months. I had no job when she kicked me out because I was a full-time law student and I was supposed to be able to live off of the tuition refund they give us every year for living expenses, especially since I put down that I was living at home on my FAFSA. I got a day job so I could afford to feed myself and pay my bills, but I started slipping in school. I went from doing amazing to barely understanding any of my course materials. Pretty soon, my professors caught on to the fact that I was sleeping in my car and the dean ultimately asked me to withdraw temporarily until I could stabilize my situation. The scariest part was having to sleep in public parking lots with my car in a dangerous city. My school is in the heart of a city that was once known as one of the most dangerous cities for violent crimes in America, but I always had to try to sleep close by to avoid being late to classes were at like 7 a.m. It was awful. I have heard horror stories from friends. A friend of mine fell asleep in his car after a long night at the library, thinking it would be safer to rest before driving home. He ended up waking up to a guy banging on the window with a gun. He was carjacked and shot in the leg twice. I was always terrified that this would happen to me. There are a ton of other homeless people and drug addicts, psychopaths, etc., just roaming the streets of this city. Once I temporarily withdrew from school to figure things out, I started sleeping in areas that I knew were safer, since I didn't have to commit to making schoolwork while being homeless anymore. Another scary thing about being out in the streets is the police. I was literally pulled from my vehicle, tested for alcohol and drugs, handcuffed and thrown into the back of a patrol car, and had my entire car torn apart with searches 9 times in 5 months, just because I was sleeping in my car and the cops had a quota to meet. I refused to have my car searched every time and demanded probable cause. Sometimes the cops were legit, like it's just kinda weird that you look presentable but you're sleeping in your Dodge Charger claiming to be homeless. Are you under the influence? Which I understood, okay cool, I'll comply to prove my innocence. But then there were a few times where the officers would claim some stupid like this place that you know for a fact isn't connected with any break-ins whatsoever is known for break-ins. The fact that you're out here is suspicious. I was always afraid a cop would abuse his authority and arrest me and take my car, which was also my home at the time. My mom kicked me out after we argued and I stood up for myself instead of letting her belittle me in front of my siblings. I'm happy to report that everything is wonderful for me now. I'm back in law school and have a great job that pays the bills and works around my school schedule. I currently go half on rent at a beautiful apartment with my boyfriend. As for my mom and I, we are on great terms. I visit her and my siblings frequently and still do stuff with them. I secretly hope she's ashamed of herself for what she did to me, but I'm not holding any grudges. I know it sounds cliché, but this experience has only made me strong AF. Story 13 Homeless whilst addicted to amphetamines in the 90s. My mum had to lock me out the house as I was stealing anything and everything. I was a complete. Anyway, I ended up sleeping in abandoned buildings, bus stops and drug dealing holes. I saw some I don't ever want to see again, junkies injecting into their neck. People just in the lowest possible conditions of humanity. It was truly hellish. Was once in this drug house and a guy burst in with a stun gun shouting he wanted anyone's money and drugs as he was going to be sent to prison once the police caught him so he had nothing to lose. The saddest thing was this. The guy who sold the drugs in that house, it was his home. He lived there 24 was bare floors, bare walls, no cooker, no fridge, no electricity or water. It was living in third world conditions. I once witnessed his ex-girlfriend come and drop his kid off with him. As she sat in the lounge waiting for him, he was injecting speed in another room. I think in that period I saw some truly depraved and degenerate things. Been a lot more cynical about people since then. Most people subconsciously believe that there are less consequences involved in killing a homeless person than a regular person. I was hit as a pedestrian by someone who ran a red and then left for dead because who cares, right? Story 14 When you're sleeping under a fire escape in downtown Chicago, with all your possessions next to you in an alley. Wasn't really sleep, just a half nightmare of waking up next to a thief or murderer. Reddit. Also, as another commentator said, how little you matter. You'd think if you were homeless and hungry on the street you're going to be saved by some stranger. Or you think people will know about your situation and show sympathy. Nothing unusual, you're just another person walking to wherever you gotta go. Where are you going? You don't even know yourself. You're just another human being, except you don't have a place to put your tired body at night or somewhere to make your only meal of the day. How do you even go to a job interview when you shower at a gym and sleep on the side of the railroad tracks if a friend can't take you in? I had to do it, I wanted to do it, and I wasn't special from anybody else. Got myself clean, ironed my best one of 2 shirts and pair of khakis I had in my backpack for a week, cleaned my shoes with my fingers and went to the God office. Story 15. I had really bad PTSD after Vietnam, and I spent about 4 years basically homeless. When I was in the rough, the thing that got to me the most was the total lack of any kind of privacy. I looked for places to hide, but I never felt really safe. The constant vulnerability just seemed to build and build. It was really hard to maintain like any kind of normal human. Story 16 was homeless, squatting in an office building with motion detector lights that turn on at 1 a.m. when no one was supposed to be in the building, then hearing footsteps go past the room you're crashing in. That, also, the cold. Not quite scary or creepy per se, but when the heating's off, it's winter, it's Wales, the radiator slowly loses its warmth. You're wearing 3 jumpers and 3 pairs of socks, but the cold buries itself into your chest. It's so cold the bones in the top of your feet hurt like, and you don't know if you should be worried about that. And you're scared you want sleep because the floor's so hard and you can't stop shivering, but you need to sleep if you want to escape this nightmare existence. Also knowing that the people you never thought you could relate to, but now identify with, are doing worse in the freezing rain, not with a lot of the knowledge you've sadly now got, unwashed, addicted to heroin, proud swanshon, and dying, also, having to rely on Redditors to donate razors. I pray I never have to return to that existence, and that no one reading this should suffer it. Sorry I didn't really answer the question that well. Also, foxes, I love them, but waking up under a shop alcove to what sounds like a dying woman vixen in heat is scary as being caught on a bench outside trying to sleep during a hurricane. Story 17. Maybe this is from a teen standpoint, but I was so envious of kids my age with their families. You see people Christmas shopping, or having a picnic, and you just want to be included so badly. I want my parents drop me off at college or go shopping for clothes together. You are still very much a child in your head and long for things from your youth. But there is a paradox because you have to make some very fast adult decisions. I would see a daughter dressed to the nines for a night out with her family, and want to be in her place more than anything in the world. Story 18. When I was 12 to 13, I used to have to avoid home due to a parent using meth and the people that Ithy brought by, so I used to sleep in our childhood tree fort the first few times, up into the woods about a half-mile off the road, and up a hill. It was a good vantage point in case I heard anything. One night I woke up and looked out to just see a guy staring up at the fort, and I froze and held the gaze and slowly laid down onto my back. I heard him walk closer and just thought to yell, "Dad, wake up, someone's coming up." He darted off into the woods, but had I not thought to say that, who knows? My dad lived 2 states away, and the only bluff I knew to yell. From that point on I found a friend's attic loft and told him my life situation, so he let me stay there at times. Being snuck into a warm place to sleep out of the snow at times is a magical warming level of love. Glad I had that friend. Story 19. I was homeless short-term about 2 months, and was fortunate enough to have a vehicle and a minimum wage job, so my experience wasn't nearly as bad as some. The scariest part for me was being an 18-year-old who didn't know her way around too well and trying to find a semi-safe place to park for the night. I'd wake up every few hours to go move my car to another place to try to avoid suspicious vehicle reports. The scariest moment was about 2:00 a.m. in a Lowe's parking lot. I woke up to someone parked in front of me with their brights shining right into my windshield. I didn't know what to do, so I just huddled further down and pulled a blanket over my head and hoped for the best. Thankfully nothing came of it. Since then I've realized that a lot of the places I stayed were in really bad areas. I'm extremely lucky nothing happened to me. I'd say next to that the scariest part was trying to stay clean enough to work to school. I was always fearful someone would come into one of the public restrooms while I was washing my hair in the sink. It happened once. I was cornered by a couple of women who came in and wanted to know why I was washing my hair, if I was alone, etc. I had to literally duck between them to get out. Ran like mad with my head full of hand soap. I don't know if they were well-intentioned or not, but it was terrifying, not good times. Story 20. Finding a safe place to sleep. As a kid and a girl, I just didn't feel safe sleeping at nighttime. Ended up staying awake at nights wandering around in well-lit places, finding places to sleep during the day, either at school, hospital ER rooms or park beaches with a lot of people. Story 21. I go back and forth on if I was homeless or not. When I got out of the military, I had no family to go back to. I crashed at friends' houses, and turned wherever I went into a drug party. After, I felt I wore out my welcome, I'd rotate to another friend's house. I was living off my deployment money. The worst thing for me was the lack of hope and safety. Story 22. Long story short, I was living in a house, and was kicked out by the landlord with no notice. The scariest part about being homeless for me was having to give up my dog. He was my best friend, first pet, and only means of mental comfort. On top of it all, I had to give the shelter my last $100 as an abandonment fee because I wanted him to have a chance at finding a new home rather than dumping him off in the wild. I cried like a baby in front of everyone. Story 23. Scariest thing for me was how hungry I was. Don't know if that makes sense, but when you're really hungry you start to lose your mind, and that was terrifying to me. You'll never forget trying to steal fruit from the stands in Brooklyn at 4 a.m. just so I can eat. Current preschool teacher at a shelter. Child was being raped by her dad. We called child services, child disappeared, child had HIV, we tried speaking to mom about services and resources, child disappeared, child being abused by parents, child goes to hospital, gets stitches, family goes home, we have meetings trying to help, mom ends up in the hospital, am haunted by so many missing children. Story 24. As a young woman, men offering to help and then realizing their intentions were actually, let's get you something to eat, some clean clothes, go back to my place, and even creepier, men trying to buy me, not just for a night but like as a long-term deal. One guy just pulled out a roll of bills while I was sitting in the sidewalk and started at 500, kept upping the number every time I said no. I ran once I realized he wasn't listening and possibly wasn't going to take no for an answer. I now carry cards for the local women's safe place and hand them out to women I see on the streets.
Glad that not my life anymore.
Story 25. Rape. It happens, and being a homeless individual, yes. It's usually women, but I'm not discounting men means that you are very vulnerable, and cops generally just turn a blind eye. Story 26. Getting in a car with a man to turn a trick for some drug money, but realizing I was about to be part of some trafficking ring, I jumped out of his car at a stoplight and ran to the nearest gas station. I told the clerks that a man would be coming after me and to tell him to leave or they'd call the cops. Sure enough, he came looking for me, but after the threats from the staff, he left. I stayed in the bathroom for an hour before I felt safe enough to come out. Story 27. I think the scariest part is just the way you are viewed by society and family. This is a situation you created and must shoulder all the blame for. Empathy is hard to come by. I was kicked out of my house for being gay when I was 16 and got a special legal emancipation. I initially shared a 2-bedroom apartment with 9 other people. The girl who lived there let the lease expire and everyone got kicked out. This was right when rave club culture were hitting critical mass, so I managed to PLUR my way into lots of sofa hopping. Worst case scenario, I would stay up all night and just sleep on the beach during the day. Eventually I squatted with 2 other people out of 1 room and 1 bathroom in an abandoned and dilapidated house. We managed to get utilities turned on even cable, and that worked out for about 5 months. We came home one day to cop cars and all our stuff out on the street. There were drugs in the house, but the cops didn't arrest anyone and let us call people to help us move our stuff. Shortly after I met someone and moved in with them, and that finally ended about 2 years of unstable housing homelessness. Story 28. I backpacked across US for a year and ran out of funds towards the end. Luckily I had a goal to reach, so I didn't lose too much focus, but I remember a week where I dumpster dove next to giant rats. Story 29. The scariest part was that after paying into the system for well over 16 years, I was suddenly disabled. It takes 2 years for rejection and an appeal to receive disability. The waiting list for housing assistance is up to 2 years, and shelters only let you stay for a max of 2 weeks. So me and my 2-year-old daughter were in a shelter about to get kicked out on our, when luckily my parents let us move into an old house on their property which would have been condemned if it had been inspected, but still better than nothing. This probably wasn't the type of story you were looking for, but it's pretty scary how non-existent the social safety net is in the US, and people just want to keep whittling away at it. You never think something like this will happen to you, until it does. Story 30. Crows at night make the same noise as the predator stalking its prey in the movie, that crackly sound. You can't sleep for too long for a number of reasons. 1. If it's on concrete and you stay still too long, you get bruises. 2. Longer time asleep, more risk of someone finding you who isn't going to be nice. 3. Risk of hypothermia if you stay too cold too long. Health is constantly being taxed. Infection is a much bigger risk. Infection will you up. Usually, if someone wants to kill or kidnap you, you won't be in a position for people to know about it. A scary thought is that you could disappear and die before anyone even knows you're in trouble. Though that can certainly happen in all walks of life and scenarios though. Story 31. I was homeless and crashing in a single-berth caravan in Enfield during the Good Friday storm of 1994. If it wasn't for the shed wall next to the caravan, it would have rolled. The caravan kept rocking over and banging the shed wall all night. Story 32. Lived in a car from January-May one year in a city in Canada. It was extremely cold, so I had to keep my car running as much as I could afford to during the nights. I had a crippling addiction to alcohol and any drugs I could get my hands on. All of my days started at 4:00 a.m. I would make the rounds to a half-dozen bars who I knew kept their daily empty cans and bottles stashed in unsecured sheds, and take not so many that it seemed obvious, but enough that I would have enough to refund for 20. 8:00 a.m. the bottle depot would open. I would refund what I stole and put 15 gas into my car, and whatever was left I would use to buy breakfast at McDonald's. 10:00 a.m. Target would open. At the time they were liquidating all of their stores in Canada and at least 2 stores in the city. They had no security on duty. In the electronics section, most of their specialty stuff was just sitting on shelves and not in a case. I would frequently steal 2 to 3 Garmin fitness trackers or Fitbits by putting them loosening my belt, finding a quiet area in the store linen section outside of camera view and shove them down the front of my pants. I'd then go to the washroom and remove the magnetic security strip, then beeline it to the door. 11:00 a.m. I would head to the local library and put an ad on Kijiji and would usually be able to sell 1 to 2 of them for $100 each, like half the sticker price. Rinse and repeat as often as need for months. Depending on how many I sold, I would spend all my money on food and alcohol. If I was running low on gas and didn't want to cut into my booze money, I would drive around some nicer areas where people who owned work trucks would often have a spare gas can poorly secured on the back of their trucks. I've also broken into cars and garages to steal gas and money and have shoplifted more sandwiches from a Safeway deli, more alcohol from random liquor stores, and way more fitness trackers from Target than I would ever admit to. I hated active addiction and I hated living in a car. While I hated only showering a couple times per week, hated being cold, was afraid of security and violent homeless people. The scariest part was waking up one morning and realizing what I had done, then calling my parents and asking for help. Turns out there had been a missing persons report filed after a week of me falling off the map. Go figure. No real safe place. When you have no home, you have nowhere to hide or run to when you're in trouble. I lived in a mix of cars, a van, and on the streets themselves for around a year in my teens. One night when I was sleeping in the back of my van, which had a broken door, so it couldn't lock, one of the other street workers ripped open my door and started threatening me and demanding I give her the money ID made that night. I said I hadn't worked that night, so had no money. I can't remember if this was a lie or not, and that got her to go away long enough for me to leave my van unnoticed. But then there was nowhere to go. It was the middle of the night. There was someone who wanted to beat me up. She'd already given me a smack and taken money off me before, cause I'm not a fighter at all, and she was much bigger and tougher and robbed me, and there was no one who cared or could help. It's a pretty tough thing to deal with. You really feel alone, completely separate from society, like you're not on the same level as other people. I eventually ended up finding a 24-hour internet cafe, and the workers let me hang out in there all night, and the next day, I still had to go back to my van. Story 33. I was only homeless for a short stint, but hands down the hardest thing was the constant fear my dog would get taken from me, or that he would be hurt. I have a small white dog who weighs a little under 10 pounds, and I was always terrified someone would try to take him, either homeless people or people who thought they deserved him more than my homeless self. Thankfully I had a shitty car at the time, so I had a place to sleep. At night I do my best to park at 24-hour gyms or with a for sale sign in the windshield because I was less likely to be asked to move along that way. I was working part-time and my friend worked with animals, so quite often she would bring my dog to work with her since it was allowed. Other days I spent what little money I had on doggy daycare Groupons. We made it through and my dog is still mine. As soon as I had money in the bank I took him to a vet and got him all taken care of, and I am typing this from my very own bed with him next to me. Story 34. Once you're homeless you are no longer a person. People do not pay attention to you and treat you as if you don't exist. If you smile at someone they look away. It's the worst feeling. Story 35. I have lived in Barcelona, Spain on the streets for quite some time. The creepiest part in my opinion is how fast you accept your homelessness and how fast you get used to it. You learn to be homeless. You learn to survive by your own. I remember the moment I got inside my sleeping bag and felt embraced and comfortable. I had forgotten what it was to have a bed and sheets, but your brain keeps you on survival mode and you just adjust. After little more than a month, you become so used to it that you stop looking for ways to get out of there. Story 36. One that comes to mind is the pain of carrying your life with you everywhere you go. My experience is not the regular homeless experience, as I quickly got the chance to live in a shelter for the homeless. I was also lucky to have a suitcase to carry my stuff around. But imagine how heavy and tiring it is to constantly have to carry every single thing you own all day, every day, and the terror of being robbed of it was crushing. It also makes everything much slower and more difficult. Imagine having to walk back and forth to many administrations, to the charity to eat, then to a place to sleep, while carrying what amounts to a dead horse. It sucks the life out of you. Story 37. Once whilst it was raining heavily I took shelter under an entrance to a market, and it was a decent-sized area. It's now about 11 p.m. I decide to try and get a kip in me and lay down. It's student night so it's quite loud, but I soon dozed off. I was woken up by the sound of a lady no less than 10 feet away from me squatting, just flat out taking her friends just being drunk. I don't think they ever noticed me. I just kind of froze, had that their vision is based on movement go through my head. Story 38. Honestly, the thing I was most scared of were the police. I met people from all different walks of life while living on the streets, literally sleeping outside most of the time, and no one had the predatory nature of the police I came into contact with. Story 39. The scariest was the constant threat of rape. I was able to get away from the streets fairly unscathed, but I was a young 16-year-old Micmac woman scraping by on sofas, empty houses, and the odd rooftop safer than alleys. People don't often check up there, but then you're stuck when goes south. The threat of rape was constant and very real, not just on the street but in squats and of course from couchsurfing hosts. I probably don't need to relate the violence stats for Indigenous women, but it's shocking. The cops were equally dangerous, for the same reasons. Likewise group homes. I was briefly in a group home for homeless teens, but it was way too dangerous. It wasn't gender segregated, so I went back to homelessness. Today I've got a degree, working entry level in my field before even finishing my postgrad, and have an idyllic domestic life with my amazing partner, our pup, an amazing wee toddler. Fought tooth and nail to get here though. Story 40. Attention. Serious tag notice. Jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment, parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit message compose. Tor AskReddit if you have any questions or concerns. Story 41. You can be in the process of dying, breathing your last breaths on your cardboard mattress, and no one will notice as they walk right on by you. I saw that happen to an older gentleman who was also homeless. The scariest and most depressing thing in the world is being ignored when you need it most. Having people shy away from you when you're trying to ask for help, and you know they have their reasons. There are fakers out there and those who prey on generosity, but there are also those whose luck has run out and the only way out is for someone else to stick their neck out for them. To this day every bone in my body aches when I see someone homeless, but you can't help them all, you don't always have cash on you, you don't always have food on you, and by time you are back with something they are gone with no sign of which way they went. So not only are you invisible to most, but the portion that does see you has to see you when they can help you because they might only see you once.